You wake up every morning, go through the motions, check all the boxes society tells you to check, yet something feels hollow inside. You have the job, the relationship, maybe even the house with the white picket fence. But late at night, when you're alone with your thoughts, there's this gnawing feeling that whispers, is this all there is? If you've ever felt this way, you're not broken, you're not ungrateful. According to Carl Jung, one of the most influential psychologists in history, you're experiencing something he called the crisis of meaning, and it might be the most important wake-up call of your life. By the end of this video, you'll understand why Jung believed this feeling of emptiness isn't your enemy. It's your psyche's desperate attempt to guide you toward your true self. Stay with me, because what you're about to discover could change everything. Carl Gustav Jung wasn't just any psychologist. While Freud was obsessed with our past traumas, Jung was fascinated by our future potential. He spent decades studying why successful, seemingly happy people would walk into his office feeling utterly lost. What he discovered was revolutionary. The very feeling of unfulfillment that tortures so many of us is actually our unconscious mind screaming for attention. It's not a bug in the human system. It's a feature. Today, we're going to dive deep into Jung's explanation for why you feel this way, and more importantly, what you can do about it. We'll explore concepts that most people never learn in school, but that could be the key to unlocking a life of genuine meaning and satisfaction. Let's start with Jung's concept of the persona, and this might be the most uncomfortable truth you hear today. Jung discovered that from childhood, we all develop what he called a persona, essentially a mask we wear to fit into society. Think of it as your social operating system. Your persona knows how to behave at work, how to act around your parents, how to present yourself on social media. The persona isn't evil, it's necessary. Without it, we couldn't function in society. But here's where things get dangerous. Many of us become so identified with our persona that we forget there's a real person underneath the mask. You become the successful lawyer, the perfect parent, the social media influencer, the good student. You perform your role so well that you start to believe you are the role. And this is where that feeling of emptiness begins. Jung called this persona identification, and he believed it was one of the primary causes of what we now call a midlife crisis. You spend decades building and perfecting this mask, climbing the ladder of success, checking off society's milestones. But the real you, what Jung called your true self, has been suffocating underneath. Think about it. How much of your day do you spend being authentically you versus performing the version of you that others expect? When was the last time you asked yourself what you actually want, not what your family wants, not what society expects, not what looks good on Instagram, but what genuinely lights you up inside? This persona trap is why you can have everything you thought you wanted and still feel empty. You've achieved success for a character you're playing, not for who you really are. But Jung didn't just identify the problem. He provided a solution. And that brings us to one of his most powerful concepts. Now, we need to talk about something Jung called the shadow, and this is where most people get uncomfortable, but stick with me because this could be life-changing. Your shadow consists of all the parts of yourself that you've rejected, denied, or hidden away. These aren't necessarily bad parts. They're just the aspects of your personality that didn't fit the persona you needed to develop. Maybe you're naturally creative, but your family valued practical careers, so you buried that artistic side. Maybe you're deeply sensitive, but your environment rewarded toughness, so you learned to suppress your emotions. Maybe you have leadership qualities, but you were taught to always be agreeable, so you became a people pleaser instead. All of these rejected parts don't just disappear. They get pushed into your unconscious, forming what Jung called a shadow. And here's the crucial part. Your shadow contains not just your negative traits, but also a tremendous amount of untapped energy and potential. Jung believed that the feeling of unfulfillment often stems from being cut off from your shadow. You're living as half a person, using only the socially acceptable parts of your personality, while all this other energy and potential remains locked away in your unconscious. This is why Jung said, "I'd rather be whole than good." He understood that trying to be perfect according to external standards means rejecting vital parts of yourself. And when you reject parts of yourself, you reject sources of energy, creativity, and authentic power. The shadow work Jung prescribed isn't about becoming a worse person. It's about becoming a more complete person. It's about integrating all of who you are, including the parts that make you uncomfortable. For example, if you've always been a nice person who never gets angry, your shadow might contain a fierce, boundary-setting energy that you desperately need. If you've always been a responsible one, your shadow might contain a spontaneous, adventurous spirit that could bring joy back into your life. Jung discovered that when people began to acknowledge and integrate their shadow, they didn't become worse people. They became more authentic, more energetic, and paradoxically, more capable of genuine goodness because it came from choice rather than compulsion. This brings us to Jung's most important concept for overcoming unfulfillment: individuation. This isn't just another self-help buzzword. It's what Jung considered the central task of human life. Individuation is the process of becoming who you really are as opposed to who you think you should be. It's a journey from living according to external expectations to living according to your inner truth. Jung observed that most people spend the first half of their lives building up their ego and their place in the world. You go to school, choose a career, maybe start a family, accumulate achievements and possessions. This is necessary and important. But then, often around midlife, something shifts. The things that used to motivate you stop working. The goals that used to excite you feel hollow. This isn't a crisis. It's an invitation. Your psyche is telling you it's time for the second half of life, the journey inward. Individuation requires you to start paying attention to what Jung called the voice of self, that deeper wisdom within you that knows who you really are and what you're meant to do. But here's what makes this challenging. Individuation often requires you to disappoint other people. When you start living authentically, you might make choices that your family doesn't understand, that your friends don't support, that society doesn't reward. You might leave the prestigious job that was killing your soul. You might end relationships that were based on who you were pretending to be rather than who you really are. You might pursue dreams that seem impractical to others but feel essential to you. Jung understood that this process takes tremendous courage because it means giving up the approval and security that comes from conformity. But he also knew that without this journey, you'll remain forever unfulfilled. The individuation process isn't selfish. It's essential. When you become who you really are, you have something genuine to offer the world. You stop living from obligation and start living from inspiration. You stop trying to be good and start being real. Jung noticed that people who underwent successful individuation didn't become self-centered. They became more connected to others and to life itself because they were no longer wasting energy maintaining a false self. Jung made another crucial discovery about why we feel unfulfilled. We're looking for completeness in all the wrong places. He identified what he called the anima in men and the animus in women. Essentially, the inner opposite gender aspects of our psyche. The anima represents a man's inner feminine qualities like intuition, emotion, and receptivity. The animus represents a woman's inner masculine qualities like logic, assertiveness, and goal-oriented thinking. Now, before you roll your eyes at what might sound like outdated gender concepts, hear me out. Jung was making statements about what men and women should be like. He was observing that psychological wholeness requires us to develop both traditionally masculine and feminine qualities within ourselves, regardless of our gender. Here's where this connects to feeling unfulfilled. Many of us have been conditioned to develop only half of our psychological potential. Men might be encouraged to be logical and assertive while suppressing their intuitive and emotional sides. Women might be taught to be nurturing and accommodating while suppressing their ambitious and analytical sides. When you're cut off from these inner qualities, you unconsciously project them onto other people and expect them to complete you. This is why Jung was skeptical of the idea that you need to find your other half. He believed you needed to become your other half. Think about it. How often do you look to your romantic partner to provide what you haven't developed in yourself? Do you expect them to be the emotional one while you handle the logic? Do you expect them to be the practical one while you handle the creativity? This projection creates two problems. First, it puts impossible pressure on your relationships. Second, it keeps you from becoming a complete person yourself. Jung found that as people developed these inner qualities, as men got more comfortable with their sensitivity and intuition, as women got more comfortable with their power and ambition, They became more fulfilled as individuals and more capable of healthy relationships. This might explain why you feel like something is missing even when you're in a good relationship. You're not missing another person. You're missing parts of yourself. So, how do you actually start this process of becoming whole? Jung developed several practical techniques, and I want to share two of the most powerful ones. First is what Jung called active imagination. This isn't just daydreaming. It's a deliberate practice of engaging with your unconscious mind. Here's how it works. You set aside time to let your mind wander, but instead of just letting thoughts drift by, you actively engage with the images, feelings, or scenarios that arise. You might have an imaginary conversation with a part of yourself you've been ignoring. You might visualize yourself in different life scenarios and notice what excites or frightens you. The key is to approach these inner experiences as if they have something important to tell you. Jung discovered that our unconscious mind is constantly trying to communicate with us through symbols, dreams, and spontaneous images, but most of us are too busy or too rational to pay attention. Active imagination helps you develop what Jung called symbolic thinking, the ability to understand the deeper messages your psyche is sending you. The second technique is dream work. Jung believed dreams were letters from our unconscious, showing us what we need to pay attention to in our waking lives. You don't need to become a dream interpretation expert, but you can start paying attention to recurring themes in your dreams. Are you often lost in your dreams? Maybe your unconscious is telling you that you're lost in waking life. Are you frequently unprepared for tests or presentations? Maybe you're feeling unprepared for some challenge you're facing. Jung encouraged people to keep dream journals and to ask themselves, what is my unconscious trying to tell me? Often, dreams will show you possibilities for your life that your conscious mind hasn't considered, or they'll highlight problems you've been avoiding. These practices help you develop what Jung considered essential for a fulfilling life, a conscious relationship with your unconscious mind. We're coming to the most important part of Jung's message about fulfillment, and it's both liberating and terrifying. Jung believed that each person comes into this world with a unique potential, what he sometimes called your personal myth or your individual purpose. This isn't necessarily a grand, world-changing mission. It might be as simple as becoming the most authentic version of yourself and expressing that authentically in your relationships and work. But here's the challenge. Discovering and living your authentic path requires you to give up the safety of conformity. It requires you to trust your inner voice more than external opinions. It requires you to risk being misunderstood, criticized, or even rejected by some people. Jung observed that many people reach the end of their lives having never truly lived. They spent so much energy trying to be what others wanted them to be that they never discovered who they actually were. He said something that still gives me chills. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Not who your parents wanted you to be. Not who society rewards you for being. Not who gets the most likes on social media. Who you truly are. This doesn't mean becoming selfish or irresponsible. Jung found that people who successfully individuated actually became more caring and more capable of genuine contribution because they were no longer wasting energy on internal conflict. When you're aligned with your authentic self, you naturally want to use your gifts in service of something larger than yourself. But when you're living a false life, even your attempts to help others feel hollow because they're coming from obligation rather than inspiration. So if you're feeling unfulfilled, Jung would say, congratulations, your psyche is working correctly. It's refusing to let you settle for a counterfeit life. That restless, empty feeling isn't a problem to be solved. It's a compass pointing you toward your authentic path. The question isn't, how do I get rid of this feeling? The question is, what is this feeling trying to tell me about the life I'm meant to live? Jung spent his life studying the human psyche, and his conclusion was both simple and profound. We become fulfilled not by getting what we think we want, but by becoming who we really are. The path isn't easy. It requires courage to face your shadow, wisdom to question your persona, and faith to trust your inner guidance over external expectations. But Jung believed, and I believe, that this is the most important work you can do. Your feeling of unfulfillment isn't a curse. It's a calling. It's your authentic self, buried under years of conditioning and expectations, fighting to be born. The question is, will you answer the call? If this resonated with you, Let me know in the comments what part of Jung's wisdom hit you the hardest. And if you're ready to dive deeper into understanding yourself, subscribe for more content that will help you live more authentically. Remember, the world needs who you really are, not who you think you should be.